course of our last few lessons, we saw how one particular movement, one particular event was interpreted in different kinds of way by different sections of the population in colonial India. We learned how Mahatma Gandhi's non-cooperation movement or civil disobedience movement was interpreted in their own ways by different sections of the society. Now, we learned that the main motto or the main objective of the civil disobedience movement was the attainment of Swaraj. But not all people conceived this abstract concept of Swaraj the way Mahatma Gandhi did. To Mahatma Gandhi, it was absolute freedom and independence from the colonial rule. But for many people, it meant freedom from paying high revenues or freedom from the local zamindars, talukdars. So these were the multiplicity of responses to the civil disobedience movement. Now there was one section of the society that did not really feel very close to or did not really identify with the large scale nationalist movement that the civil disobedience movement was. Now the class or the section of society that we are talking about here were the lower classes, and these lower classes of the society from the 1930s came to call themselves the Dalits. Now the Dalits were not given great recognition within the Congress, because the Congress leaders were afraid that if these lower class, lower caste people were given proper recognition within the Congress, then the Sanatanis, the upper caste Hindus, might feel infuriated and they might break away from the Congress. So in order to ensure the participation of upper class Hindus, the Congress initially did not grant recognition to the Dalits. So the Dalits were underrepresented, they were marginalized, and they were a minority section in the Indian population. Now Mahatma Gandhi believed that in order to bring all the masses together and achieve independence from the colonial rule, it was very crucial to remove this social evil of untouchability. And so Mahatma Gandhi wanted to ensure the Dalits' participation in the national movements. Now Mahatma Gandhi saw this as a sin done to humankind. That is, this practice of untouchability was sinful in nature. No human should be discriminated against on account of their class or caste. In fact, Gandhiji had organized many satyagrahas which were to ensure temple entry rights for the Dalits, because the Dalits were not allowed to enter temples or draw water from the village community wells, and Mahatma Gandhi made sure to organize satyagrahas in order to fight against this practice of untouchability. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi often used to sweep the streets himself so that he could dignify the work of the bhangis or the sweepers. So Mahatma Gandhi wanted to practice a policy of inclusivity. In fact, he gave these Dalits a name called Harijans. They were the children of God. From the year 1933, he also began this newspaper called Harijan. So he wanted to bring these Harijans or these Dalits together under the umbrella of the Indian National Congress and ensure their participation in the civil disobedience movement. But despite Gandhi's efforts to include the Dalits in the Congress, their participation in the civil disobedience movement remained limited, because the Dalits did not really feel at home in this Congress that was mostly dominated by upper class Hindu men. The Dalits now began demanding reservation in educational institutions and separate electorate in the legislative councils, because the Dalits felt that this political equality, this political pushing forward of the Dalits towards success could only ensure the complete removal of social obstacles, of social stigma that the Dalits were met with. And so it was very important to reserve seats for them in educational institutions so that they could be brought at par with the upper class Hindu children. At the same time, the Dalit community also demanded separate electorate for themselves so that their identities, so that their histories were not obliterated by the hegemonic or the dominant ideas and narratives. B.R. Ambedkar was a very popular and very educated Dalit leader. Now, a clash happened between B.R. Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi at the second roundtable conference when B.R. Ambedkar demanded separate electorate. Now, the British government accepted this demand for separate electorate for the Dalit community. Mahatma Gandhi started holding a fast unto death. Gandhi was of the opinion that this separate electorate would threaten and jeopardize the unity of the country. If the Dalit community was granted a separate electorate, several other communities would also want their separate electorates, and in this way the people could be broken into several factions, several groups, and Gandhi was not at all looking forward to granting separate electorates to these distinct communities. So Ambedkar later on had to accept Gandhi's terms, and the Pune Pact was signed between Ambedkar and Gandhi in September 1932. As a part of this Pune Pact of September 1932, the depressed classes were now granted reserved seats in provincial and central legislatives. But they were to be voted by the general electorate only. So, these reserved seats in provincial and central legislatives were not of great use because they were to be voted by the general electorate only. Now, the Dalit community continued to be suspicious of the Congress and its motives because the Dalit community knew that the Congress was ruled and dominated by upper class Hindu people. Likewise, there was another section in the Indian society that did not really belong to the Congress, that did not really identify with the Indian National Congress, and this was the Muslim community. Now, large sections of the Muslim community did not participate in the movement because they felt that the Indian National Congress was ruled by Hindu people. It did not give the Muslim community the recognition it deserved, and so these people were not at all believers of the ideas of the Indian National Congress, which is why they did not participate in the civil disobedience movement. Now, this was a time when communal sentiments kept on surging in the minds of the masses. What do we understand by communal sentiments? By communal sentiments, we understand a kind of bitter feeling, hatred towards another community, towards another religion. So, communal sentiments between the Hindus and the Muslims were surfacing during this time. And these were given further impetus by the partition of Bengal and several other events. And when the Khilafat and non-cooperation movement came to an end, the Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. In fact, 1920s onwards, the Congress was very closely associated with popular Hindu religious groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. And these Hindu religious nationalist groups now even began to dominate the ideas of the Congress, shape the policies of the Indian National Congress. So it was inevitable that the Muslims began to feel more and more alienated and distant from the Indian National Congress. So it is for this reason that the Muslim community did not really participate in the civil disobedience movement. But both the Muslim League and the Indian National Congress knew that they required to enter negotiations in order to achieve an alliance, in order to establish an alliance or association between these two communities, between these two groups. And by the year 1927, it seemed that all communal troubles between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League were coming to an end. In fact, the Muslim League, which was led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was willing to give up the demand for separate electorates. Now, Muhammad Ali Jinnah proposed certain conditions, and if those conditions were fulfilled, then he mentioned that the Muslim League was willing to give up the demand for separate electorate. Let us look into what these conditions were. But before learning about those conditions, let me ask you a question. Who among these was a leader of the Muslim League? Was it Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Syed Ahmed Khan, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, or Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan? Well, the correct answer is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He was one of the most important leaders of the Muslim League. So the conditions that Muhammad Ali Jinnah forwarded were reserved seats in the Central Assembly. So if the Muslims were given reserved seats in the Central Assembly, then they would stop demanding for separate electorate. And likewise, they also demanded representation in major Muslim dominated provinces like Bengal and Punjab. So these two were the conditions which were proposed by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Now it was upon the Congress to see whether it would agree to these conditions. Now, initially there were hopes of establishing an alliance between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League so that together they could fight against the colonial oppressors. But hopes for a resolution shattered when in 1928 at the All Parties Conference, M.R. Jayakar, who was a member of the Hindu Mahasabha, strongly opposed efforts at compromise. Now, M.R. Jayakar was a staunch and radical member of the Hindu Mahasabha, and he in no way was willing to arrive at a kind of compromise with the Muslim League. And all hopes or goals of reconciliation and negotiation between these two communities were completely shattered. Now the Muslim community became increasingly fearing that their ideas, their identities, their lives as a whole would be subsumed by the Indian National Congress, because the Indian National Congress at this point of time became the most important political party in the entire Indian subcontinent, and the Muslims were fearing subjugation of their culture and identity. They feared that as a minority group, they would be completely swept out of existence. They would be marginalized. Their ideas, their opinions, their beliefs, their interests, their requirements, their demands would not be paid any heed to by this Hindu-dominated Indian National Congress, which is why the Muslim League and the Indian National Congress kept on going further and further away from each other at this point of time. In our lesson on the civil disobedience movement, we learned that the industrialists and rich businessmen backed the civil disobedience movement, because they saw that it is by supporting the civil disobedience movement they would be able to defy the colonial rules and various kinds of laws that were imposed on their businesses. So they wanted to carry on with their businesses without any restrictions, which is why they supported the civil disobedience movement, and they also funded this movement, which is why the Congress supported these industrialists in turn. Now the Congress, since it was supporting the industrialists, did not really take into account the workers' demands. Now the Congress was afraid that if it took into account or if it gave redressal to the workers' demands, then these industrialists could be infuriated and they might stop backing this movement as a whole. So these workers were not really taken into account, or these workers were not really brought under the fold of the Indian National Congress. As a result of this, these workers also abstained from participating in the civil disobedience movement. Now the civil disobedience movement witnessed mass-scale participation of women. But you will be surprised to know that women's participation in the civil disobedience movement was only tokenistic. It did not really have much of a valid importance, because though these women were a part of the civil disobedience movement, certain nationalist leaders like Mahatma Gandhi held very different opinions on women. Mahatma Gandhi believed that it was the duty of women to look after the household and be good wives and mothers. So why should women go out on the streets and agitate against the colonial rule, against the oppressors, when they could be good wives and mothers and stay back in their houses? At the same time, the Congress was also keen on ensuring only the symbolic presence of women rather than giving them real authority. So women were a part of the Congress and not a part of the Congress at the same time. The leaders were mostly Hindu males, Hindu upper caste males to be specific. So women were marginalized even within the Indian National Congress. They were not very powerful leaders like Mahatma Gandhi or Jawaharlal Nehru. And Gandhi was of a very narrow-minded opinion that women should be good wives and good mothers. So in this way, women's participation in the civil disobedience movement was also very complicated and conflicted. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on the different voices that were prevalent in the Indian national movement. We learned that there were different sections of the society who were responding to their own immediate needs. Now, not all sections of the society were drawn to the abstract ideal of attaining Swaraj. What they wanted was an immediate addressal of the issues, of the problems their lives were enmeshed in. We learned how the depressed classes, or the Dalits, the Muslims, the women could not really participate properly in the Indian National Congress for various reasons. So they did not really belong with this national movement. They did not really identify with this movement. So this accounts for the multiplicity of perspectives on the Indian national movement. In the series of these lessons, we learned how the spirit of nationalism grew in the minds of the Indian masses during the wake of colonialism. So Indian nationalism was intricately tied with anti-colonial sentiments. Now the Indian masses tried in ways more than one to overthrow the colonial rule. They faced brutal repression. They faced official executions. They were charged with cases when they were innocent. They were often brutally tortured. They were exploited. But these nationalists were filled with a sense of courage, pride, love and devotion for their motherland, which is why they braved all these in order to bring the motherland its independence. In the series of these lessons, we also focused on certain very important movements like the non-cooperation movement or even the civil disobedience movement. We looked at both the sides of the coin to see how these movements were successful on the one hand and not so successful on the other. Having learnt about that, we also took into account how Gandhi became a popular leader and how Gandhi's ideas came into clashes with that of many sections of the society. Now, all in all, what we are to infer from these lessons is that various people were trying in their own ways, in their own small or great ways, to fight the colonial oppressors. And it is because of these various fights, these various movements, these various protests that India gained its independence in 1947. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.